She came here for the first time in the summer of 1960. She had a mission: to find an elusive tribe of beings that lived in these forests and observe them until her money ran out. Eventually, she found them. For 30 years, she watched their story unfold as one generation gave way to the next. And what she saw has changed forever the way we think about our closest relative in the animal world, this wilder version of ourselves. When Jane Goodall first arrived at Gombe National Park in Tanzania, she felt an immediate connection to this wild and beautiful land.
For me, being far away from people, out in the wilds, particularly in forests, is the closest I can think of to heaven. And if I ever go to heaven, I hope it's very much like Gombe, because it's peaceful, there's a sense of timelessness. Out in the woods, out in the forests, particularly with the chimpanzees, that sense of oneness with nature is what is so self-fulfilling.
Jane has been studying and teaching others about the chimpanzees at Gombe for half her life. The chimp is found only in Africa, and there are fewer than 250,000 of them left. Before Jane began her work, there had been only one other study of chimps in the wild. It lasted 2 months. By concentrating on this specific community, Jane has given the world an invaluable gift: the life history of 3 generations of chimpanzees. Jane hopes that her work will become the world's work. So today she spends much of her time helping Africans to learn about the habits of their special possession, spreading the word that chimpanzees, wherever they live, are worth caring for.
Yes, great. After my son, could you write to Joe?
Jane Goodall wants to hook the world on chimps and has come to America to do just that.
This is for Betsy, B-E-T-S-Y.
How am I meant to sign this? Got it all the wrong way round.
Jane has taken on a new crusade to improve the lives of chimps in captivity. Her work has helped make zoos better for the animals and more fun for the people who visit them.
We are very pleased today to have Dr. Jane Goodall, and she would like to spend a few minutes talking with you about chimpanzees and what she's doing in Wichita.
Well, good morning to all of you. Now, if I'm a human and I'm greeting you, I just say good morning, or I say hi, or if I was in Africa, I'd say Jambo. But if I were a chimpanzee, I'd give you a greeting pantoot,
Because of Jane's influence, chimps at many American zoos now live more like they do in the wild. These humane enclosures have become places where people can experience the chimp's unique culture for themselves.
Directed at us, ending up with nice little water spit. And then if they get really scared, and I'm sure some of you must have heard, you'll start with a hoo, 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 ah, 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 that sort of sound. Because I didn't bang on the wall. He is, you see.
Come off the glass. He's gonna come. Yeah, he goes from there.
And guess who he did it to? Me.
Not to me.
So, but when they charged you like that, what was that, a sign of aggression?
No,
What was happening?
attention getting.
Oh.
I mean, these captive chimps, they can't touch you and they want to attract your attention. And unless they've been badly handled, they don't hate people. But it's fun. I mean, this was fun for him. And he's used to doing that, and everybody will shriek and jump away. That's fun. That's manipulating your audience. Gives you some feeling of control over your environment. Here we go.
Be the flying through the air.
Could go off the ropes on occasion to swing the ropes and get good.
You wait for the day when the glass is finally, you know.
It's like a pole vaulter.
Well done.
Nice done.
Absolutely beautiful. We're very impressed and we're all intimidated. I feel about the chimpanzees and other animals I've watched a great sense of intuitive understanding, which is based on the fact that I respect them as individuals. I know that they share our emotions to some extent. I think that some of the emotions the chimps feel are identical to certain human emotions, such as pleasure, joy, sadness, despair, fear. And that's the only way that I can watch them, is to know that these things are true. Oh, well done.
Jane was born in England on the 3rd of April, 1934. Her parents were divorced when she was 8. She grew up with her sister and her mother in the town of Bournemouth, a few minutes' walk from the English Channel.
Let's see. That's the photographer. And that one's copyright Karen.
That's Karen. You better put it on the back, will you?
Jane's mother, Van Goodall, has always been one of Jane's most trusted confidants.
No,
An author in her own right, Van is currently working on her daughter's biography.
Come on,
Anymore.
Well, what about all those letters?
Well, these letters are all the ones, that pile of lost addresses.
I'll look in the dustbin.
That's for JGI, for Bobbert.
Bobbert.
Van has witnessed Jane's gift for observation from the very beginning.
She would get up at 6, rush down into the garden, sit there for hours. So she always liked observing creatures. She always had patience, and nothing, except having to go to school, would stop her. She disappeared one afternoon, and after 5 hours, we thought, well, we must get the police. It was beginning to get dark. And suddenly somebody said, "Blimey, look." And we looked across a field, came a little bit draggled figure, bits of hay and straw, eyes shining. Said, "Where have you been?" "Well, I've been in a hen house," she said. waiting to see how a hen laid an egg. Nobody'd tell me. So I just sat there. And now I know.
And the thing was that I hadn't understood where there was a hole big enough in a hen for an egg to come out. So first of all, I'd watched the hen go into the little chicken coop and followed her in to watch, but of course then she got disturbed and came out. So I realized even at 5 that to watch this amazing thing I was going to have to wait and hope that a hen came in to lay her egg. So that's exactly what I did, and I was 4 or 5 hours in that hen house.
All the soldiers who'd been out on the search just shrugged their shoulders. One mad child.
By the time Jane was 9, hens had been replaced by horses.
Prize for the most courageous riding or something. the rider with the best glue.
Well, if I look back on my childhood, then riding was one of the most important parts. Being at one with a horse, feeling very free, you were able to cover a lot of ground quickly, but it was so much better than on a bicycle, being out there with nature and horses. I'm particularly grateful to my father for having inherited his amazing constitution. I mean, I can do things, I can go without food, go without water, endure in the same way that he can, and that's just an incredibly fortunate gift. Both my mother and my father were adventurous. Mum is incredibly adventurous. When I was growing up, whatever I wanted to do, providing it was something remotely sensible, she would back me up. She never said, "Don't be so stupid, you can't possibly do that. How do you think you're going to Africa? How do you think you can work with wild animals? Nobody does it." She never said anything like that. She always would say, if you want to do something enough, you'll find a way to do it.
Since childhood, Jane had known what she wanted, to go to Africa and watch the wild animals. Her chance came at age 23 when she got a job in Kenya as secretary to anthropologist Louis Leakey.
Louis Leakey began talking about a group of chimpanzees living on a remote lakeshore and how he'd been looking for years and years for the right person to study them. And I had no idea he meant me. I had no qualifications, no training, nothing. But after a bit, I said, "Louis, I wish you'd stop talking about these chimps because that's exactly the kind of thing I've always wanted to do all my life." And he said, "Well, why do you think I'm talking about them?"
The chimpanzees that Dr. Leakey was talking about were in Tanzania, on Lake Tanganyika. Gombe National Park lies on the eastern shore, 30 square miles of rugged country.
It was thought at that time that for a young English girl to go out into the bush was extremely unsafe, very dangerous. She was sure to be raped or something terrible would happen to her. I just thought that my destiny lay in Africa and doing what I'm doing. I remember stepping out on the shore, putting up the tents, and then sneaking away and climbing up the hillside. And I met a baboon troop. They barked at me, and there were birds flying around, and it was just everything I dreamed of come true. I felt completely at home.
But months passed, and Jane still had not seen a single chimp close enough for any worthwhile observations. Then she discovered the peak.
So I went on my own, which I wasn't really supposed to do, up the slope nearest the tent and sort of stumbled upon this amazing vantage point, the peak. And it was from the peak that I was first able to piece together something about the daily behavior patterns of the chimps, what they ate, kind of groups they moved around in, and at the same time they got used to this peculiar white-skinned ape, and became less and less fearful, so that eventually I was able to move down from the peak and gradually get closer and closer to the chimps without their running off.
Day after day, Jane watched them. Soon she was able to recognize individual chimpanzees, and once she could, she did something unusual. She gave them names.
David Greybeard was a dignified, calm, incredibly handsome male. Why he had so much less fear of people than any of the other chimps, I'll never know. David was the first chimp to actually take a banana from my hand. The other chimps would watch in amazement. What is this crazy chap doing going up to this horrible-looking woman? And eventually, though, they all began to relax, and certainly a lot of that was due to David. It would take them even longer without him. Another equally special chimp was Flo, who came also in those very early days, because it was Flo who first had sufficient trust in me to come up and allow her infant to reach out and touch me with those wide, wondering eyes, and that's another moment I could never forget. I never really felt hardship here at Gombe. I know it was tough, and sometimes there wasn't very much to eat. We'd had very little money to begin with, and particularly in the rains when one was living in a tent that leaked and everything was wet from morning till night and binoculars were clouded up. You know, there were times when it was difficult, but it was the kind of life I'd always wanted to live, and so it was fine. When I'd been here a whole year by myself, I was probably becoming what some people would think a little strange, and I would say good morning to a tree that I was very fond of, and I always loved to touch the tree and imagine the sap pulsing up inside. I still do. I think that if you live by yourself out in the wild, you sort of need to talk sometimes to somebody. But I still do, even though I'm surrounded by people. As soon as I'm on my own, I sometimes talk to things as well.
Then, in 1962, Dr. Leakey urged National Geographic to send photographer Hugo van Lawick to Gombe.
Well, when I first arrived there, conditions were very primitive. Of course, Jane was interested in looking at the chimpanzees and finding out as much as possible, and far less interested in her camp and her food especially. So I found her, I think, with one fork and one knife and one plate, and eating very simple food. So it was very, very primitive. But I'm rather interested in food, so I started reorganizing that side of it.
Louis Leakey thought that he'd found a photographer to film the chimps and me, and he also thought he'd found a husband for me. And as in so many ways, he turned out to be right.
I was fairly naive in those days, I suppose, and assumed I was just going off there to film her. And I suddenly realized that he was being a matchmaker and that he hoped Jane and I would get together. Which, of course, is what happened.
Hugo had the same love for animals, the same love for nature. And he was, of all the photographers who've been to Gombe filming the chimps, he had the most intuitive anticipation of what was going to happen. And that's why he's got such wonderful sequences in his film.
Hugo was able to capture one of Jane's most stunning discoveries, that chimps, like humans, use tools. The tool was a long grass stem, deftly manipulated to pull a meal from termite mounds. Jane also learned that chimpanzees, especially males, hunt and kill other animals, anything from birds to baboons. But all chimps, mothers and children included, will join in the feast. In 1967, Jane and Hugo's son was born. They nicknamed him Grub. His safety quickly became a primary concern.
When Grub was a very tiny baby, we built a cage in which he could sleep in the daytime, because chimps are carnivores. They have been known to take an occasional human infant, and quite clearly we were going to keep our own son very, very safe. And as he grew up, he didn't want to have anything to do with them, and that's been the same all his life.
Yes, he was frightened of chimpanzees and also baboons. The chimpanzees, the first time they heard him crying, absolutely rushed up to this building, looked into the windows, and their hair all came up, which was typical meat-eating behavior. So at that stage, they certainly would have gone for him if they could have. On the beach with the baboons, he did have one close encounter with a baboon. He was climbing up a small tree, and this baboon obviously felt that humans shouldn't be climbing trees and suddenly went for him. Luckily, I was standing next to him, so I hit out at the baboon and grabbed Grub. So that certainly must have given him a fright.
For me, it was very, very important to establish a close mother-child relationship, not to leave him for long periods of time. I wanted to imitate the chimp mothers to some extent. They have endless patience, endless tolerance, and they're very affectionate. And so for the first 1.5 to 2 years of Grub's life, I modeled my behavior to some extent anyway on a chimp mother.
Tomorrow, maybe.
There was one chimp whose maternal instincts especially impressed Jane.
Flo was a wonderful mother. She had 4 youngsters at that time and then gave birth to Flint. Flo was, by our standards, very ugly with her bulbous nose and her raggedy ears, but she was an incredible chimp. She was indomitable. If something threatened her youngsters, whether it was an adult male chimp or a baboon or what have you, she would race to their defense. She was quite fearless in this regard. She'd stick her few remaining hairs on end and charge in where angels fear to tread. As a result, her family, or most of her family, turned out to be very high-ranking chimpanzees.
One of Flo's sons attained the highest rank of all in chimp society, that of alpha male. In Jane's time at Gombe, a half-dozen males had become alphas, the chimp equivalent of a king. Chimp males exist in a hierarchy riddled with cliques, factions, alliances. But one individual always stands out. He usually fights his way to the top. Eventually, all others submit to him. The alpha male maintains his position with threats and fancy charging displays. When Jane arrived at Gombe, the highest-ranking male in the community was an aggressive chimp whose displays were both swift and spectacular. Jane called him Goliath, but as every king knows, there's always a challenger lurking, waiting for his moment. Mike was one of the lowliest chimps, until he came up with a better idea. His talent with kerosene cans dazzled and intimidated the other males, including Goliath. By making himself seem bigger and more dangerous than he really was, this undersized chimp bluffed his way right to the top. A benign alpha, Mike lasted 6 years. Chimps are usually in their mid-20s before they become alpha males. Goblin was barely 15. His rise to the top was systematic and relentless. He fought and bullied the other chimps mercilessly. Goblin seemed to enjoy conflict and the chance to humiliate a rival. The other chimps never treated Goblin with much affection, but from his boyhood on, he was always feared. In chimp society, there always comes a moment when the highest-ranking male falls from power, usually at the hand of a younger rival. In time, it was Goblin's turn.
Yesterday I met Goblin on the trail, looking very old and thin and sad. Goblin was deposed as leader of Casacala community about 2 months ago during a fight with the number 2 male Wilkie, during which Goblin was badly bitten, the wounds became infected. When he recovered, he tried to go back into the community, but was attacked rather viciously by very many chimps since when he's been in hiding, and this was the first time I'd seen him since that day. Yesterday, the main part of the group went quite far to the south. Every chimp has his and her own distinctive voice, so that Goblin would know that his enemy number 1 Wilkie was far in the south, and therefore it was safe for him to go back to camp.
Upheavals in Gombe were paralleled in Jane's life. In 1974, after 11 years of marriage, she and Hugo agreed to separate.
Good exposure and contrast. Very good. Have you got that? Over.
Hugo and I realized at a certain point in our lives that for him it was necessary to move away from Gombe. He had his living to earn, and he had to go and take on other assignments. And so we drifted apart, and we agreed that it was better to go our separate ways. We've remained very good friends.
Today, Hugo lives and works in Tanzania's Serengeti Plain, making wildlife films, with occasional help from Grub, now 23. For Hugo, as well as Jane, work is a driving force.
She's a very determined lady on her work, and her work is everything to her. And I think that's what there is to it. It's determination to be good at what she does, just as I am on films, really. You want to be the best, if you can be. He's using his tongue nicely there for feeding.
It was sad to me and to everyone when the marriage broke up, but it was inevitable. Hugo had his work and Jane had her work. It was a mutually excellent agreement, I think, that they came to. But I think there's always something a little sad about a marriage which seemed at first to be a perfect one, to work out not quite so well.
More than a decade of research had formed Jane's view of the chimpanzees. The somber events of the 1970s began to change it.
When I first came to Gombe to study chimpanzees, I knew nothing about them. Nobody really knew very much about them. So during the very early years, I thought increasingly how like people they were, but they seemed to be much more gentle, much nicer, much kinder than we. But then, because the research carried on so long, it became more and more apparent that chimpanzees, like humans, have a dark side to their nature. We went through the terrible time when Passion and Pom were cannibalizing infants, and we went through the dark, bleak years of the war between the Casacala and the Kahama chimps. And sadly, this is quite clearly showing that chimpanzees are even more like us than I used to think at the beginning.
The war between the chimpanzees started when 6 males and 3 females left Jane's northern Casacala community and moved south. For 3 years, gangs of northern chimps hunted down members of the splinter group in the south. One by one, they annihilated the entire southern community. In 1975, human affairs in Gombe took their own dark turn when 4 of Jane's students were kidnapped.
The kidnapping was traumatic for many, many people. It was a group of armed rebels from Zaire that crossed the lake in the middle of the night. They found 4 of my students, took them, bound them up, took them back to Zaire.
The students' ordeal lasted 10 weeks, until one of the fathers paid a ransom, rumored to be almost $500,000. In the furor surrounding the kidnapping, Jane was accused of caring more about her research than her students.
I don't believe anybody who knows me or who's read much that I've written believes that I care more about chimpanzees than humans, because that's never been my philosophy. I find chimps utterly fascinating. I like some chimpanzees better than some humans, and I certainly like a lot of humans better than I like some chimpanzees. And those students, particularly one of them, it was like losing my own daughter. And we actually went through as much hell as anybody else.
Today, Jane lives and works much of the year in Dar es Salaam, in the house she shared with her second husband, Derek Bryson, until his death in 1980. She still hasn't finished writing the story of Gombe's chimpanzees, a story which wasn't always taken seriously.
Right at the beginning, when I first became known in scientific circles, there was a tendency among a lot of hardcore scientists to write me off as a Geographic cover girl.
Since then, Jane has earned a PhD from Cambridge, but she hasn't changed her unorthodox approach.
When you go to university and you're taught about studying animals, you are told that you have to be completely detached from the subject in order to make precise observations, that you mustn't become emotionally involved. I think that's complete rubbish. It's perfectly possible to be incredibly emotionally involved, feeling great empathy for your subject.
One of the families Jane feels closest to belongs to Flo's daughter, Fifi.
This is Fifi and her entire family. And we have Freud stretched out on the ground. And then behind Fifi, playing with little Faustino, is Frodo. Fanny, Fifi's eldest daughter, is also playing with Faustino. Faustino's just about 6 months old. And up in the tree above is Flossie, Fifi's second daughter. It's really a very, very remarkable family. Fifi has produced 1 baby every 5 years, just like clockwork. Most females lose 1 or 2 or even 3 youngsters. Fifi's record is phenomenal. These, in fact, are all Flo's grandchildren. And when Fifi was an adolescent, she was absolutely fascinated by anything to do with sex. We didn't realize that this was how many adolescent female chimps behave. Anyway, naturally, we called her first child Freud. Freud is really one of my favorite chimps. He's large, but he's gentle, and he's intelligent. He'll probably never be a high-ranking male, although he will probably support his young brother Frodo when he makes his bid for the top, because Frodo certainly will. Frodo has the stuff that alpha males are made of. Fifi's second son, Frodo, who really is a bit mean. He particularly doesn't like white people, and he tends to charge and hit and grab and terrorize people. Down below, all these baboons have been waiting, looking up, hopeful that Frodo would drop some bits and pieces, scraps, but they were unlucky. He's even eaten the skins today. Frodo has this habit of coming up to people and taking their hand, and that sometimes is the beginning of very rough play that can very easily lead to aggression. That's why he's rather dangerous. Just keep still. Right from the time Frodo was a tiny infant, he's enjoyed throwing little rocks and things of that sort. Frodo's a bully, and he bullies the other chimps too. But you get mean chimps just as you get mean people. Frodo doesn't dislike me. It's just that he enjoys the sensation of power that he gets, I believe. I have been frightened by Frodo. Fortunately, after the event, while it's happening, one isn't frightened, but he frightened me once when he nearly broke my neck. He stamped on my head, and again, I don't think he meant to hurt. He didn't realize how strong he was. After being at Gombe for 30 years, I have developed a very special relationship with some of the chimps, particularly those like Fifi, whom I've known since I very first arrived. People often say to me, don't you feel the chimps are like part of your family? Well, no, because chimpanzees are different. They are their own very remarkable selves, but I do have a very close empathy and sympathy with the chimps. I want to help them if they get sick. And in fact, it's very important to help them if they get sick today, because they're in such a tiny little area, 30 square miles, with humans pressing in on all sides. They can no longer exchange genes with chimps from outside the national park because those chimps have gone. So every single chimpanzee living in the park, and that's about 160 all told, is precious.
All over Africa, chimpanzee populations are dwindling. Jane is doing what she can to save those that are left.
Burundi is the little tiny country just north of Tanzania. It's on the edge of the lake. It was Rwanda-Urundi. Well, now here's a country that's destroyed almost all its forest. It has 4% left. They've killed all their elephants, all their rhinos, almost all their buffaloes, almost everything, but suddenly they want to save what's left.
Jane's ideas on how to do that are being taken seriously in Burundi. She's here to discuss the president's plan to establish a preserve for the country's 400 remaining chimps. In an area where timber is a valuable commodity, the president's decision to set aside forest land for animals is an act of unprecedented generosity and a tribute to Jane's tireless campaign on behalf of the chimps. But Burundi also has chimpanzees in trouble of another kind. Many have been illegally imported from Zaire to serve as pets. Like infants of any species, chimps are irresistible until they grow up. This garage owner used a baby chimp to attract new customers to his business. Now Whiskey is 6 years old and often unruly. So the owner keeps Whiskey on a chain. A publicity stunt gone wrong.
all over Africa in countries where chimpanzees live or countries into which they can be smuggled from neighboring nations. Everywhere there are chimpanzees like Whiskey who desperately need rescuing because there is always hunting and poaching in all the countries where chimps exist. And babies will then be sold as pets, or worse, to dealers who send them to the international markets for entertainment and for biomedical research.
In laboratories throughout the United States and the rest of the world, chimpanzees are still being kept for experimental purposes. Jane is pushing hard to improve the conditions these captive chimps must endure.
First lab I visited was the SEMA lab in Washington, and I had heard about it and I'd seen video of the conditions there. But when I actually went into a room and saw 2 3-year-old chimps in cages that were 22 inches by 22 inches square and 2 foot high, so that they could barely turn round, when I looked into their eyes and saw they were completely dead, the eyes of animals who've lost all hope, then that is something that will haunt my sleep, haunt my dreams, for as long as I live.
Although conditions at SEMA have improved since this videotape was shot, chimps are still being used to study a variety of diseases, primarily hepatitis and AIDS. Jane hopes that will change.
I personally believe that we were extremely arrogant in the first place to assume that we could take a living creature and do with it as we will for the sake of ourselves. We should be searching much harder for alternatives to the use of any animals, and particularly our closest relatives, the chimpanzees. And while we continue to use them, we should use as few as possible. We should make sure that the conditions in which we're keeping them are optimal.
A recent ban on importing chimps has forced some U.S. labs to develop their own breeding programs. These twins were born 6 weeks prematurely. They're too frail to stay with their mother.
If they won't mind.
No.
All right. All right. Good.
They shouldn't be resting too long.
No. Oh, you've got a snuffly nose again. A little snuffly nose. And the other one. Look.
You can still see the baby's skin on them. It's beginning to flake.
Dr. James Mahoney oversees the care and maintenance of the chimp population at Lemsip.
Well, you're probably thinking by the time they grow up, we won't be even using them in research anymore.
Well, we hope so, don't we? We hope it won't be necessary, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
I am constantly faced with a dilemma of using an animal like a chimpanzee, which is so sensitive, for any type of research. The only way I can bring myself to do this is that I think it is for a higher good, and that is the betterment of man, but at a terrible cost to the animal. We deprive them of everything by having them in the cage. Unless we give them things, give them their rights, they have nothing. They're not like human beings. They can't fight for their rights like we can.
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. It's when we realize how like to us they are in their intellect, in their emotions, that it becomes an extremely important ethical question as to whether or not they should be used in laboratories, and if they are used, how they should be treated.
An animal as intelligent as a chimp needs stimulation. Jane has been working with labs to find new ways to keep the chimps occupied. Something as simple as a Kool-Aid popsicle can hold their interest for a half an hour. Contact with humans who care is even more important.
See how handsome you look? Isn't that terrific? You want it back? You want it back? No, you don't, do you? You want me to have it. Oh, I know. You want me to look at myself. And if I turn this way, you can see me and you in the mirror. I can. Can you see me and you in the mirror? Both of us? How about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yet, when the cares of the world become too burdensome, there is always Gombe to return to. Here, at least, nature once again seems whole.
Sometimes when I think of the problems facing chimpanzees worldwide, I think, how can we cope? There's so much suffering out there. Fortunately, though, in the last few years, I have sensed a growing awareness, particularly among young people, students, and children, about the dangers to the environment, danger of extinction. And it's this growing understanding, I think, that gives us hope for the future.
You remember I used to come back with 20 every evening.
I know you did. Just with your little boy Rod you used to catch fish.
That's right.
Now there's absolutely nothing. Whole
And
Great Lake,
every year it gets less.
nothing in it. Terrible. Really awful. It's terribly important, I think, that children should grow up not having this incredibly arrogant view that the world was made for us humans. I think it's all about respecting other individuals' right to live and right to enjoy their lives and have certain freedoms, whether those other beings are human beings or non-human beings, and that we all matter, we all have a place in the world. Each species, whether it's human or non-human, has been evolved over countless thousands and thousands of years into a perfect organism, and we should respect that, and we should think twice before we squash a fly or kill an animal that has as much right to live, I think, as we do.
Coming soon from National Geographic Video.
Exuberant, compassionate, devoted. No doubt about it, the dog is man's best friend. Whether they're vying for a ribbon or working a roundup, prize-winning show dog or just plain pal, These canine companions have earned our respect and stolen our hearts. Join National Geographic for a loving look at our enduring partnership with those wonderful dogs.
Where there's smoke, there's fire. And where there's a volcano, that's where you'll find Maurice and Katja Kraft. From Iceland to Hawaii, these death-defying scientists risk their lives in hot pursuit of active volcanoes. Their tools are cameras. Their mission is to capture nature's most powerful spectacle on film. Join National Geographic on this unforgettable journey to the edge of the volcano.